In Disney's 2025 live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch, beneath the colorful Hawaiian landscapes and alien adventure lies a profoundly moving exploration of grief and loss. While the film maintains its sense of fun and whimsy, it doesn't shy away from depicting the raw, messy reality of how different people, especially children, process profound loss. This deeper emotional layer gives the film its resonance and explains why it connects so powerfully with audiences of all ages. The film establishes early on that Lilo and Nani have lost their parents. Unlike the original animated film, which suggested this loss was relatively recent, the 2025 remake specifies that their parents have been gone for a few years. This subtle but important change allows the story to focus not on the immediate shock of grief, but on its lingering effects. How loss reshapes identity, family dynamics, and daily life long after the initial crisis has passed. We see grief manifested differently in each sister, reflecting how people process loss in uniquely personal ways. Nani, thrust into the role of guardian at a young age, channels her grief into hypervigilance and responsibility. Her character is described as having been a straight-A student with a full scholarship to study marine biology, dreams she set aside to care for Lilo. Her grief expresses itself as determination to maintain what's left of her family, often at the expense of her own needs and aspirations. When Tutu, their elderly neighbor, shows Nani the acceptance letter from her dream school that she retrieved from the trash, we glimpse Nani's sacrificed future. Her response, "Yeah, I know, but Tutu, there's no way," reveals how completely she subordinated her own dreams to her new responsibilities. This conversation poignantly illustrates how grief can force people to reimagine their entire life trajectory and identity. Lilo's grief manifests in ways typical of children processing profound loss, through behaviors that often appear odd or concerning to outsiders. Her ritual of feeding a sandwich to a fish named Pudge because he controls the weather suggests an attempt to create order and control in a world that suddenly seems chaotic and unsafe. This behavior likely connects to how her parents died, possibly in a weather-related accident, revealing Lilo's magical thinking that if she can appease Pudge, perhaps she can prevent similar tragedies in the future. The film doesn't explicitly state this connection, trusting the audience to piece it together, which makes the revelation all the more powerful when we understand the deeper meaning behind Lilo's seemingly quirky behavior. Her need to care for Pudge reflects a child's desperate attempt to protect what remains of her family when she feels powerless to do so in more direct ways. Lilo's social difficulties, being labeled a weird eye and garbage girl by her peers, further illustrate how grief can isolate children who process emotions differently from their peers. Her creation of voodoo dolls, her interest in death and disaster, and her unpredictable emotional outbursts are all consistent with how children might express unprocessed grief. Rather than portraying these behaviors as simply quirky character traits, the 2025 remake frames them as understandable responses to profound loss, adding depth to Lilo's character. One of the film's most emotionally authentic moments occurs when Lilo looks at a photograph of her parents and talks to them. This scene reveals that while her parents are physically absent, they remain a vital presence in her emotional life. The way she speaks to the photo, asking for guidance, and sharing updates about her life, shows how the relationship with lost loved ones continues even after death, evolving rather than ending completely. Nani and Lilo's relationship is complicated by their shared grief. When they argue and Lilo shouts, "Stop pretending to be my mom," the pain on Nani's face reveals multiple layers of hurt. The reminder that their mother is gone, the implied rejection of her caretaking efforts, and perhaps guilt that she can never truly replace what Lilo has lost. This complex dynamic feels authentic to how grief can both bind family members together and drive them apart as they struggle to redefine their relationships. Social worker Ms. Kikoa acknowledges the family's grief directly, saying to Nani, "I know it hasn't been that long since your parents passed away. while still insisting on practical steps to ensure Lilo's welfare. This approach recognizes grief without using it as an excuse to avoid addressing real concerns. The film portrays the social services intervention not as villainous, but as a well-intentioned system that nevertheless lacks the flexibility to fully accommodate the messy reality of grief. Stitch enters this environment of unresolved grief as both a disruptive force and, ultimately, a catalyst for healing. As an alien experiment designed for destruction, he initially seems to embody the chaos that grief has already unleashed in the Pelekai household. Yet, as the story progresses, his own journey from isolation to connection parallels the family's journey through grief toward a new kind of wholeness. When Lilo asks Stitch if he had a family, and he responds, "No family," a bond forms through their shared experience of loss, though of different kinds. Lilo has lost her parents, but still has the concept of family, while Stitch lacks even the understanding of what family means. This conversation establishes their connection as one based on mutual recognition of absence and longing, creating the foundation for the healing that follows. A particularly revealing moment comes when Lilo tells Stitch, "You're not bad. You just do bad things sometimes." This insight reflects her own experience of grief-related behaviors being misinterpreted as bad when they're actually expressions of pain. Her ability to extend this understanding to Stitch shows how empathy can emerge from suffering, creating connection where there might otherwise be rejection. The concept of Ohana, family, takes on deeper significance against the backdrop of loss. When Lilo explains to Stitch that Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten, she's not just teaching him a Hawaiian cultural value, but expressing her deepest fear and greatest hope. Having experienced being left behind by her parents through no fault of their own, she clings to the idea that remaining family members must hold tightly to one another. Nani faces a profound dilemma when Ms. Kikoa suggests that she could officially relinquish guardianship of Lilo so the state would cover Lilo's medical expenses. This moment forces her to confront whether keeping their family together at all costs is truly what's best for Lilo. The pain in her expression as she asks, "What would that look like?" reveals the tension between her promise to care for Lilo and her practical inability to meet all her needs. When Nani tries to prepare Lilo for possible separation, she uses a memory of summer when they were on opposite sides of the island, but could still talk on the phone. This attempt to frame potential foster care in terms a child can understand shows her desperate attempt to soften what would be yet another profound loss for Lilo. The scene is heartbreaking because we understand that both sisters are trying to protect each other while facing circumstances beyond their control. One of the most emotionally charged scenes occurs when Lilo clings to a photograph of her parents during a moment of crisis, revealing how this physical connection to her parents provides comfort during frightening situations. The film visually links this moment to later scenes where Lilo holds on to Stitch, suggesting that he has begun to fulfill some of the emotional security she lost with her parents. The film's Hawaiian setting provides a culturally rich framework for exploring grief. Hawaiian concepts of ancestors remaining connected to the living, the importance of extended family, Ohana, beyond blood relations, and connection to place all inform how the film portrays the grieving process. Rather than suggesting that Lilo and Nani need to move on from their loss, the film embraces a more cyclical understanding of grief, where the dead remain part of the family circle. Tutu's character embodies this cultural perspective on grief. As an elder, she provides guidance that balances practical concerns with emotional needs. Her statement to Nani that "It's also your kuleana to make sure you don't leave yourself behind" acknowledges that grief can cause the living to sacrifice too much of themselves. This wisdom helps Nani understand that honoring her parents' memory includes nurturing the gifts they gave her rather than setting them aside entirely. The climactic scene where Stitch declares, "This is my family. I found it all on my own. It's little and broken, but still great," directly addresses the central theme of grief in the film. The acknowledgement that family can be broken, yet still valuable, validates Lilo and Nani's experience. They haven't failed because their family no longer resembles what it once was. Instead, they've created something new that honors what was lost while embracing what remains and what can be added. In the resolution, we see how grief can eventually lead to growth and new possibilities. When the extended community comes together to rebuild the Pelekai house, we witness how grief that initially isolates can eventually expand one's circle of connection. The house itself becomes a metaphor for the family, damaged but rebuilt stronger with the support of others who become part of their extended Ohana. Nani's decision to pursue her education with the support of Tutu and David suggests that processing grief is not about returning to what was before, but about finding a new path forward that incorporates both the painful reality of loss and the possibility of joy. When Lilo encourages her to go to school, saying, "It's what Mom and Papa would want too," we see how a healthy relationship with loss can include carrying forward the values and hopes of those who are gone. The film's final scenes show the expanded family enjoying everyday moments together, playing on the beach, sharing meals, engaging in Hawaiian cultural practices. These images reflect how grief eventually becomes integrated into life rather than standing apart from it. The ability to experience joy doesn't erase the loss, but coexists with it, creating a more complex emotional landscape where memories of the past enrich rather than overwhelm the present. What makes the 2025 remake particularly effective in its handling of grief is its avoidance of easy answers or magical resolutions. Stitch doesn't fix the family's grief. Rather, his presence creates space for them to process it differently. The family doesn't stop missing their parents or feeling their absence, but they learn to build a life that includes both remembrance and new connections. The film also skillfully avoids the trope of getting over grief in favor of a more nuanced portrayal of growing with grief. By the end, we understand that Lilo will likely always feed sandwiches to Pudge and talk to her parents' photograph. These aren't behaviors she needs to outgrow, but meaningful rituals that help her maintain connection with what she's lost. Similarly, Nani will always carry the weight of having become a caregiver at a young age, but she learns that this responsibility doesn't have to define her entire identity. Through its portrayal of social services, the film acknowledges another dimension of grief, how systems designed to help families in crisis can sometimes fail to recognize the nuances of grief processes. Cobra Bubble's initial rigid approach reflects institutional limitations in addressing emotional needs beyond practical concerns. His eventual alliance with the family suggests hope that systems can become more responsive to the complex realities of grief when individual relationships are prioritized. The character of David offers yet another perspective on supporting those experiencing grief. His consistent presence and practical help without demands or expectations embody the concept of showing up for grieving loved ones. Rather than trying to fix their pain or rush their process, he simply remains available and ready to help however needed. His character illustrates that sometimes the most healing response to grief is simply reliable presence. By setting this story of grief against the backdrop of alien adventure, the film creates a powerful metaphor for how grief itself can feel alien, dropping into ordinary life without warning and transforming everything it touches. Just as the humans must learn to understand Stitch despite his strange behaviors and appearance, those experiencing grief must learn to recognize and accept feelings that may seem unfamiliar or frightening. The 2025 remake's visual approach to portraying grief adds another dimension to its emotional impact. Lighting choices often reflect emotional states, brighter for moments of connection and healing, more shadowed for scenes of isolation and pain. The camera work during emotional conversations between Nani and Lilo often uses intimate close-ups that capture the subtle expressions that accompany complex grief emotions. Music plays a crucial role in the film's portrayal of grief as well. Hawaiian musical traditions, with their ability to express both joy and sorrow simultaneously, provide a perfect soundtrack for a story about finding happiness without denying loss. The film's score transitions between playful themes during adventure sequences and more contemplative melodies during moments of emotional processing, mirroring how grief ebbs and flows rather than progressing linearly. What ultimately makes Lilo and Stitch 2025 so powerful is its willingness to present grief honestly without allowing it to define the entire narrative. By balancing moments of profound emotion with humor, adventure, and joy, the film captures the fullness of life even in the shadow of loss. This approach offers viewers of all ages a framework for understanding that grief is not something to avoid or overcome, but an integral part of loving deeply and living fully. The film's final message about grief might be summed up in the expanded understanding of Ohana that emerges through the story. Family includes not just those physically present, but those who have died, those who choose to join the circle of care, and even unexpected additions like an alien experiment. This inclusive vision offers comfort to anyone experiencing loss by suggesting that love continues and family expands even when it seems most broken. In a media landscape that often simplifies or sidesteps difficult emotions, Lilo and Stitch 2025 stands out for its willingness to acknowledge grief as a central human experience worthy of thoughtful exploration. By embedding this theme within an accessible, entertaining story, the film invites viewers of all ages to reflect on their own experiences of loss and perhaps find new ways of understanding how grief shapes but need not define us.